I'd like to introduce to you Dave doing or this or that or how Ithaca became the county seat over Elm and St. Louis and so on. So Dave, you got it.
Because you're all real interested in history, you wouldn't be here. You would think that some reasonable people could come together to work on a reasonable project and do it in a reasonable way and come up with a reasonable result. But when it came down to deciding where the county seat of Gratiot County was going to be, they threw all kinds of reasonableness out the window. And it turned out to be kind of a long, drawn-out, and divisive kind of affair. Some of you probably read about it in Chapman or Tucker or other sources. So all I'm doing tonight is telling you what probably a lot of you already know. Why couldn't these people just say, okay, it looks to me like the county seat should be here? Well, it's because basically there were three of them all saying that, and it wasn't the same place. They all had their ideas of where it should be. Now, just to make sure that we're clear on it, the county seat is simply where the courthouse is going to be. It's where the court will be, and the county officers and all the county offices will be at that spot. So, just a quick review. Gratiot County was formed up on a map before settlement took place. The legislature formed a bunch of counties around here, gave them names, and they basically just had, most of them had Chippewa Indians until 1854 mainly, when a lot of whites came in to settle. And so Gratiot was just on the map until some settlement took place south of us here along down toward Clinton County. And at a certain time, some settlers in North Shade said, there are enough of us now, we want to organize our township. Up to that point, the townships had no names. They only had the customary number identifying all the townships of the state. And so then Fulton said the same thing, and some other townships said the same thing. We want to organize. We want to have an election and elect our township officers. That was a signal to Lansing that it was time to make Gratiot County something other than a spot on a map. People now were in Gratiot County, and it needed to be organized, not just with the townships and their officers, but with the county officers. And so, in February of 1855, they passed a bill that made Gratiot County an honest-to-goodness county. And the bill said that in November of 1855, they would hold an election. And that's when they would elect the county officers, the clerk, the register of deeds, the sheriff, the prosecuting attorney, the same ones that we have today, and maybe a few changes. Okay, so from February to November, they have time to determine who's going to be put up for the offices. And they know it's not going to be a partisan thing. This isn't like today Republicans against Democrats. They're just trying to find people who may be qualified or even marginally qualified to fill those particular offices. Because here we are in the frontier, maybe some of those offices are going to be hard to fill with people that are really, really qualified. But they'll do their best. So, the townships went ahead as they were developing more and more, and they had their elections, and they elected their township officers, which I suppose would be the supervisor and the clerk, maybe the constable, probably the highway commissioner. There may have been some others. And in one of the townships, and I don't remember which one, the clerk knew that probably he had to swear in the others, but nobody had sworn him in. So he went to a notary, and the notary swore him in. Then he swore in the others. So now they could conduct the business of their offices in their township until they found out that the law said they were all illegal. The clerk of the township had to be sworn in by the county clerk, not a notary. What did that mean? Well, they hadn't had the county election yet. There was no county clerk. Now what do? This is a catch-22. In order to do this, you have to do this. In order to do this, you have to do this. So it just simply took months until they actually had the election. And then they would have a clerk who could swear in all the people who needed to be sworn in, people that sworn in, not sworn at. Okay? So they decided that they would try and put together a ticket, a slate of officers for these different positions. And they met at Lucius Knapp's cabin just a little north of Gratiot Center, Ithaca. And delegates had come from the different townships that were organized, and so they had discussion. Well, there were some guys there that really, really wanted the county seat to be in their town. Abram Crawford from St. Louis, Ralph Ely from Alma, John Jeffries from Ithaca. Now, of course, that was Pine River, Elyton, and Gratiot Center at that time. I'll just talk about them in their present names. So, the bill that had been passed organizing the county said this: 3 of the officers will be responsible for determining the location of the court. That would be the circuit court, the one that deals with crime. They will decide. This will be the county clerk, the county treasurer, and the sheriff. Those 3 will determine where the court will be. Well, everybody wanted it. You say, well, why in the world were they so excited about having the court or the courthouse or the county seat? Well, think of this. If you had business to do with the county, back then you didn't just jump in your car and go to the county seat, to the courthouse, conduct your business, turn around and drive home. This could take several days, no matter what it was, land, or maybe you were witness to a crime and there was a trial or whatever. You had to get there, and when you got there, you were planning to stay for more than a day, in most cases, so you took a room in a hotel or a boarding house. You paid for it. You had to eat. You paid for it. If you were one of those rare people that didn't walk but actually had a horse, the horse had to go to a livery and be cared for, and you paid for it. And as long as you were in town and you needed some stuff, you either bought or bartered, because you were there, stuff to take back to your home, your log cabin. And so whoever got the county seat had almost a guaranteed degree of prosperity. They just knew they were going to prosper because of all the traffic that would be coming to that town. So it's no wonder that the leaders of these 3 towns were doing everything that they could possibly do to influence the location of the county seat, because having it guaranteed a degree of prosperity. So, what did they want most to be elected to? Well, treasurer or sheriff or clerk, because they're the ones that are going to decide. Ralph Ely and Abram Crawford both wanted to be county treasurer. So they brought delegates from the different townships to determine who would be on the ticket. And they had a discussion, and as you can imagine, it was a little contentious. And in the end, Abram Crawford was on the ticket to be maybe voted for or elected county treasurer. And I don't know why that was so special compared to the clerk and the sheriff, but whatever. So, Ralph Ely was really put out. He had fully expected he would have that position on the ticket, and he was a little angry about it, so he got some of his cohorts together, and they went from cabin to cabin in different parts of the county. They ended up in Arnold Payne's, way down on the South County line, and they put together a different ticket. Now, the original from the first meeting, since they had no printing press, all of the copies of this were written in pen and ink to be circulated so people would know who was running, in a sense. Well, down there, they sent a man with a copy of the new ticket to Ionia, where it was actually printed on a printing press. And copies were brought back and circulated here in the county. Now, which of the two do you think was most impressive? You know, little method to the madness there. So the election was held on November 6, 1855, and Ely's ticket was the one mainly elected. Okay, so Abram Crawford was left out, so St. Louis didn't look good for them. Looked a little more favorable for Alma. Ithaca, of course, was in the center, and that would be very logical. That's why John Jeffrey bought that property to start with, assuming that's where the county seat would be. Well, how are they going to determine then, you know, with the sheriff and all of this falderall, okay, the court's going to be here. And Ely was pretty sure he would influence them by maybe inviting them to Alma, and at the new frame school there, they would hold the court, and everybody would treat them well, and they would say, oh, the people in Elm are pretty nice, and we've had court there. But if they could set a precedent, there's a pretty good chance that that's where it would stay. Okay? Well, they went to, the Board of Canvassers then had to confirm that the election was done, these people were elected, and everything was okay. So they met at somebody's cabin and went through this list, and some of them said, probably Abram Crawford said, this really isn't right because that's not the ticket that we were putting up. And so they started throwing out townships. They threw out Arcata. Out went Ralph Ely as the county treasurer. In came Abram Crawford, who of course had wanted to be county treasurer. But in the process of throwing out Arcata, they also threw out Francis Nelson, who was the chairperson of the committee that was meeting that day. So they had to get a new chairperson. And all of this got complicated. Out went another township, out went another township. Well, there was an awful lot of anger by that time. So, by the next day, Ralph Ely had marshaled his forces, and they finally all agreed it was only fair that the delegates from all of the established townships should be the ones that would confirm the election of the people. So it was the people's choice. Okay, so they said to the secretary of this committee, Mr. Porter, you make out the paperwork and sign it, and that will mean that it is all official. And he did. So they had the election confirmed, it was all set, they knew who it was that was elected. Now, I don't think that nowadays these names mean very much to us at all, but I do want to comment on a couple, and it rehearses what the offices were, and they're pretty much the same. Judge of Probate, John R. Cheeseman. Well, obviously Cheeseman Road's named after him, and he and his brother Edward are basically the father of St. Louis, not Pine River. St. Louis and Pine River were neighboring towns that eventually all together became St. Louis. John R. Cheeseman had never been a judge. I don't think he was a lawyer. He was a doctor. And he also was a farmer. And so they were looking for somebody. They didn't have anybody that could be a judge that had ever been a judge. They were looking for somebody that had had some education and was apparently intelligent and maybe would make good decisions. So they came to Cheeseman and said, would you have your name put on? And he agreed. So he was a little qualified, but he wasn't totally qualified. Sheriff, George Walker. Clerk, Orville Wood. Treasurer, Ralph Ely. Register of Deeds, Henry Lane. Prosecuting attorney, Franklin Miller. That means something to some of you because you've used his material, his reminiscences at the society. He left us a wonderful account of all this stuff, and I've used some of his material in tonight's talk. Franklin Miller had been admitted to the bar in New York State, and he decided to cast his fortunes in the wilderness of central Michigan. And so he came here to practice law. Now there would have been some land issues probably, and maybe some others. He had no longer arrived, and it was just before the election, and they said, oh, you're an attorney. Well, the two men that said we could put their names down for prosecuting attorney, those two men, neither of them are attorneys. and yet they were going to elect somebody, the prosecutor, who was not an attorney. And they said, can we put your name down? So they put down Frank Miller's name, and he was elected. And had only been here a short time when he took a position that paid a tidy $300 a year. And that was a lot of money back then. So it all worked out real slick for him, at least that far. Of course, his problem was he was a drunk and then left. The circuit court commissioner was Henry Lane, who was also the register of deeds. Surveyor, Sidney S. Hastings, who surveyed so much property, roads, and everything in the county. Coroners, 2, Lewis B. Loomis and Levi Smith. Now, I only speculate why you need 2. If you need the services of a coroner in the matter of a death, if somebody dies in Seville, you don't want the coroner living in Elba. You understand me? Because you don't want to take a couple days before they come to examine the deceased. Yeah, and it wasn't going to work back then. So anyway, they had 2 coroners. Okay, those are the people that were elected. Now the townships, the lower townships, had been attached to Clinton County townships for administration until the county got organized. Eastern townships were attached to Saginaw County for administration until the county got organized. Now, some of the county officers and a few of the supervisors walked from here down to DeWitt, which was the county seat of Clinton County at that time, and they took care of the business and severed the connection, so it was all now legal. Did the same thing with Saginaw. Gratiot County was now strictly on its own as a county, and it was time to take care of the county business. The county business, of course, was, now that we have the officers, where do they function? We don't have a courthouse. Where is it going to be? Well, I got to tell you these 3 little stories. Earlier than this, and I don't know, it's way back before there was much settlement at all, a rumor circulated that there was a section in North Shade, what became North Shade Township, that had already been designated by the state as the county seat. So naturally, a guy went in and bought that, only to find out it was a hoax. And it was just a rumor. So maybe he kept it. He was probably disappointed in any case. Okay. Then there was the matter of a paper city. This was a city that had been put on a map, but it didn't exist. The only thing that was there was one log cabin. It was called Gratiot City, and it was on the Pine River between St. Louis and Alma. Maybe somewhere in there by Evergreen Mobile Home Park, or it was in that vicinity. And so the guy that was there said, I'll put a dam across the river. I'll build a grist mill. I'll build a sawmill. I'll build the county buildings if you'll come here. And they said, we're not interested. Then there was Alexander Runyon, who had one of the first frame buildings in the county, and he was off in the west part of Pine River Township in the wilderness. And somehow one of the sawmills, which both had been new, Ely's or Joe Clapp's in St. Louis, he had boards sawed, and he actually made a frame building, which he offered to the county as the courthouse. Now, it would have been probably a third the size of this pavilion, or maybe even less. And they said, oh, you're way too far away from everything. We're not interested. Well, I'm interested because that building still exists. Probably the oldest building maybe in Gratiot County. And it exists because it's inside a house. They built around it. And I was in the crawl space, and there were the beams with all the bark on them still. A level part on the top, probably done with an adze, and then the floor planks put over that. So you people would appreciate that that is one of the most historic buildings in Gratiot County, but you can't see it because the house has been built around it, out on Winans Road. Nope, they didn't want Runyon's offer. Now it's down to Elma, St. Louis, or Ithaca. And then there was going to be the decision made from those. Now, there was all kinds of activity going on behind the scenes here. John Jeffrey and prosecuting attorney Miller made 6 trips by foot to and from Lansing, trying to get the legislature to say that Ithaca would be the county seat. Ralph Ely made 2 trips to Lansing for the same purpose for Alma. Abram Crawford lived in Lansing half the time, and he was over messing with the legislators all the time, trying to get them to pass some kind of law favorable to St. Louis. So all of this was going on behind the scenes, but they all knew that what the other ones were doing. Finally, they met at, I think, John Knight's cabin, a little bit north of Ithaca, and the representatives were there from the townships, probably the supervisors, and they said, it's going to be Gratiot Center, Ithaca. Well, both Ely and Crawford had alienated so many people by that time that both of those guys knew they couldn't marshal enough support for their towns, and they sort of maybe gave up. And so it was to be Ithaca. Well, John Jeffrey was ecstatic because he owned so much of Ithaca. He figured that they might buy the land from him. And besides that, with all that traffic, he'd have a store and this and that, and he would prosper. Until they said, we want to get the land from Simon Knott, which would be the corner of Arcata Township. You know, 4 townships come together in Ithaca. And so they were going to get it from Simon Knott. I guess they thought Simon Knott would give them the land at the corner of Arcata. Simon Knott was out of town, so they didn't know what to do. So they waited for a month, and then they met again, and by that time, John Jeffrey realized that if it was going to go his way, he was going to have to do the right thing, give them the land. And I'm sure he gritted his teeth many a time to think of doing that. But in the end, he might prosper from it. Of course, he was a rich guy to start with, so, what's a little more money to him? So, they met and they said, he said, I'll do this, and they said, okay, it will be 4 lots on Block 8. He'd had Sidney Hastings survey the Gratiot Center town site. It was all trees. And I said, okay, we're happy about that. And then he also agreed to build the courthouse, be a log building. Well, the next day they decided that they needed more than just like a promise. They wanted to do something tangible. So somebody found a wooden stake, and they took an axe, not a 2-bit axe, but the other kind, and they went down to where the courthouse was going to be put in what's now Courthouse Square, and on probably the northwest corner, they stuck the county stake. This must have been one of the more interesting events in the early history of Gratiot County. They got the stake in the ground, and then they took the butt end of the axe and whacked it, and they passed the axe around so that everybody got a turn at whacking the stake, pounding it in, and every time that they passed it on and a guy hit it, everybody yelled and screamed. It was a big deal. It was described as a jollification. So they had a big time sticking the county stake. That made it official because there's the stake. John Jeffrey was good as his word. He built a 2-story log courthouse, but it was across Center Street to the east where the present Methodist Church is located. And I'm not sure why they put it there unless it was that they didn't know exactly where they wanted the next courthouse. Well, that lasted for a while. I think it held 4 offices. To begin with, they were going to have the court there, and then they realized that Gratiot County wasn't on any of the judges' circuit. So they had to get that taken care of. Then they were wondering, where do we hold court? So Ralph Ely said, and he's still got a little hope in his mind. He's still hoping. He says, well, come to Alma, and you can use the new frame schoolhouse. And so court was held there 2 times, as I recall. And he just thought, man, maybe there's a chance. Well, then the supervisors or the county officers said, from now on, the court will be in Ithaca. So they built the second courthouse where they put the stake on the northwest corner, pretty much, of Courthouse Square. It was 1 story, but it had a higher ceiling, so it looked more dignified. And it housed, I think, maybe 4 offices, but there wasn't room there for the court. And so somebody had built a business building, and upstairs was a hall, and that person leased it or rented it out for a while to the county, so if there was a court case, they would have room to accommodate everybody for all those activities. So the first courthouse was a 2-story one down where the Methodist Church is located. The second one was on the corner of Courthouse Square, and that lasted for a number of years, and then they said we need a bigger one. So right behind it, sort of in the middle of the west side of Courthouse Square, they put up the two-story frame courthouse of 1871, which lasted for 25 years. They needed more room or it was getting dilapidated, and the supervisors by that time are being wishy-washy about this. They were afraid to bring a millage vote to the people. And so nothing was happening, and the need was great, and people were getting upset. So when push comes to shove, who pushes and shoves? Amy Wright, Alma's millionaire businessman. A rumor circulated that Amy Wright was going to build a $50,000 courthouse in Alma and donate it to the county. No, he wasn't. But that's all it took to get him off their butts. And they immediately brought a millage before the people, and it passed, and we have a very magnificent 1902 courthouse. People, I'd put that courthouse up against any in the state for beauty and elegance and magnificence. We should be really proud of it. So, 4 courthouses before we get including the present one. Now, Ely swallowed his pride. He admitted it was hopeless, and he authored a resolution that the second courthouse, which was the present one at that time, should be plastered inside, painted. They should get the right kind of hardware for the doors. The windows should be sealed properly. They should get stoves. They should get the proper furniture. And they did. And I guess when you look at Ralph Ely grated on a lot of people's nerves. But in the end, he did do what was the right thing for the most good. So give him credit for that, I guess, at least. Okay, I want to close with a story that you have maybe heard me tell before. A man came from Detroit to do business in Gratiot County. I mean, he came here just for that. There was some legal thing at the courthouse. And when he arrived and got to the courthouse, it was all locked up. Well, he didn't know what to do. It turned out that the county officers were out electioneering. They hoped to get reelected, so they were circulating in the county to try and get votes. Well, he went across the street to John Jeffrey's store, which also housed the post office. When he went in, the only person in there was this kid, teenager. And so the teenager said to him, "What can I do for you?" And the teenager was Nathan Church, Lafayette Church's oldest son, and frankly, people, one of Gratiot County's coolest people in our history. He really is. There are good and bad things about him, but he was pretty cool. And so the guy said, "Well, I came to do this business, but they're locked up." And so Nathan Church said, "Well, maybe I can help you." And so he took the key, locked the store, took the guy over, unlocked the courthouse, and the guy told him what he wanted. They went to the various offices. He conducted all the business, the way to the guy's satisfaction, and he sent the man happily on his way back to Detroit. And a short time later, an article appeared in the Detroit Free Press that said, "You won't believe this, but in Gratiot County, all of the county offices are held by one 16-year-old boy, and he's the postmaster of Ithaca." Thank you very much.
That was great, Dave. Come back again. Tell us another story.
Just offer me food.
By the way, Dave has written this book on our public trust. If you haven't seen it or had a chance to read it, it's great.
I have 5 of them here tonight, and they're still going for $25. Yet. So my wife is in charge of that. If you want a copy of Flash and Fizzle about the Republic truck coming, see her.